Let me check it. So welcome back to the Dell FMC campus, Adobe Max 2017 Las Vegas. We have Mr. Ian Robinson here. He's going to be doing a hands-on session, and feel free to join in. Check out all our awesome stations along the perimeter there with our new canvas and awesome 38-inch monitors, the curved monitor over there at the Ask the Expert station. You can talk to all our experts, but without further ado, I'd like to introduce the one and only Ian Robinson.
Hey, how's everybody doing today? Good to see you. Thank you for coming out, checking it out. Really appreciate it. It'll help if I talk into the microphone, so there we go. All right, so I have an After Effects project open right now, and in terms of experience level, how many of you have used After Effects at all? Any of you? New? Okay, that's totally fine. I know you guys. Yeah, all right, cool. So I'm going to call out everything that I'm going through. Right now, I have the project panel, which is in the upper left corner of the interface, and that is where everything that's been imported into this project is going to be organized. So if we look in the top of the project panel, I have a folder here called the footage folder. And I'll click the triangle to the left of the footage folder to open that up. And I have two video clips in here that are both compressed. They're MP4 files, okay? Compressed MP4 files are sometimes a little bit more intensive for systems to play back, dependent upon the system and the card chip that it actually uses. A lot of times, if I'm doing things for broadcast, I'll be working with an uncompressed file format, like some of the Avid codecs, et cetera, but this will work perfectly well for today. So I want you to click once on the concrete video file in the top of the project panel, and you'll notice that in the upper left corner, it breaks down the pixel dimensions, the duration of the clip, the frame rate, millions of colors, and the codec. Now, I want to create a composition that matches those settings exactly, okay? Because After Effects will allow you to drop any resolution of footage into any different composition. So we'll start by clicking on this video file and click and hold and drag it down to the new composition button in the bottom of the project panel. So when I let go, I'll have a new composition that I've created, and it's automatically going to be selected in the project panel. And if you notice, its frame size, duration, and frame rate match the footage exactly. So now we're off to the races, okay? If you have multiple compositions open, which we do, you'll see them listed here in the timeline. So if I click on the words trail zoom, that will take me to a different composition. I only want to be dealing with this one composition, so I'll close the other tabs just by clicking the X in the upper left corner of each of the tabs. So I'll close the trail zoom and the camera track so we only have the concrete video file in the timeline. Is everybody good with me? All right. So the way the After Effects interface works, you have the project panel. When you double click a composition, it opens in the timeline. And then whatever you see in the timeline will show you up here in the composition panel. So this blue line is the current time indicator. If I click and drag on the current time indicator, I can view different frames in my composition. So as I move my current time indicator down the timeline here, I'll see different frames in the top of my composition panel. Now there's one thing I want you to note. This file had time code in it, so when I created a new composition from it, if I move the current time indicator to the start, notice the time code starts at 5 seconds, 22 frames. I'm gonna fix that so it starts at frame 0. Does that sound like a plan? All right, that's what I like to hear. So I'll click once in the timeline to make sure it's active, and I'll press Control-K to open the composition settings. In the composition settings, down here at the bottom, you can change the start time code. So I'll change that to a setting of 0. You don't have to fill out zeros all the way across, just 1 0, and click OK, and now my timeline starts at frame 0. Okay? If I want to see the footage, since the timeline panel is active, I can press the space bar and it'll go ahead and play the footage back. Now I shot this footage on a camera that had a gimbal, so there's a little bit of a bounce. I sort of flicked my wrist when I was making the move. So the bounce is usually somewhat problematic, but it's gonna be perfectly fine. We're going to match some text into the scene, and then we'll animate the text out of the scene and have a graphic appear underneath the text to kind of look like it's sucking the text into the bottom of the concrete. Does that sound cool? All right. So I'll press the space bar to stop playback, okay? And I'll right-click on the timeline. If you right-click directly on the piece of video footage in the timeline, you can automatically go to the track motion area or track camera area. Now, track motion creates a single point tracker that will track the motion of an element in the screen. Track camera will actually analyze the scene and recreate a 3D version of that camera in After Effects. And what that does is allows you to place elements in 3D space and make them look like they're in this scene seamlessly, okay? So when you right click, I want you to choose Track Camera, okay? And it's gonna take a second when it tracks the camera, and in the composition panel, you'll see it's analyzing in the background. So the words in the background are key in that statement, because as the computer is processing this information, I could go back to the project panel, open another composition, and keep working, and the computer will process in the background. This is a really nice feature of After Effects, and it's a really nice thing on these Dell computers. It kind of blows through all the frames as we're making the adjustments to the other comps. Since I'm teaching this one aspect of working in After Effects, I'm just going to keep talking until it's finished analyzing. So, in order to figure out where it is in the process, if you look in the project panel in the upper left corner, you'll get an update as to how long it's going to take to finish. And then it'll say solving camera. And once it's finished solving the camera, I'll be able to actually see these rainbow points on the ground plane here, okay? If you're not seeing these points, you want to click once on the camera tracker here in the Effect Controls panel to make sure that is selected, okay? Now, if you hover your mouse over the different colorful X's, you'll get a target. And what this target is doing is giving me a place to specify where I'd like to place my graphic, okay? So all I have to do is choose a place where I think the target looks like it's sitting on the ground plane, okay? So I'm gonna choose something relatively close to the middle of my project here. And your projects may look like they're in a different place because my current time indicator is randomly at 2:27, okay? Doesn't matter if you're at the beginning of the timeline or the end, but just so we're all in the same place, I'll move the current time indicator back to the beginning of the timeline, okay, just by clicking and dragging, and I'll place my target right here in this area. And I'll just click once. When you click once, 3 points will be selected, okay? I'm just gonna zoom in so some of you can see that, okay? If you hold down Shift and click on multiple points, that will help you refine where the target is placed in the scene. Okay, I'm gonna zoom back out here. Now, most of the time, I just work with 3 points being selected, but you can choose however many you like until you get a placement that you think works for you, okay? I'm going to click out of the timeline. I'll click once on the camera tracker to reselect it. I'll come back over to the area where I'd like to place my text and click once, and 3 points have been selected, okay? When you hover your mouse over the middle of the target, you'll get a move tool. Do you all see the move tool? It's that kind of 4-way arrow with the black triangle in the upper left. What this allows me to do is move the target. So I could click and drag, and I could move the target over here. So what this allows me to do is choose track points in one area, but place graphics in another. Now, for this instance, I don't need to do that, so I'll just go ahead and move my target back. But I wanted you to know that that is something you can do in terms of placing elements into the scene, all right? So in order to add an element into the scene, I'll go ahead and right-click and choose Create Text and Camera, okay? Now, the way my text appears and the way your text appears may be completely different. because what After Effects does is it remembers exactly what the last settings were when text was created on that system. So don't panic if yours doesn't look like mine. In order to make adjustments to the text, I'm going to go to the upper right area of the After Effects interface, and I'll click on these double white arrows, and I'll go to the text workspace. When I choose the text workspace, I'll get the character panel and the paragraph panel active, okay? So now I can come up to layer 1, and I'll click once on the text layer, and I can choose whatever typeface I like up here from the character panel. So I'll click on the drop down, and notice in After Effects, I'll get a preview as to what the font will look like here on the right side. I want you to go ahead and choose whatever typeface inspires you. I'm gonna stay kind of in the box and choose Arial, okay? In the bottom of the character panel, I want this to be all capitals. So I'm going to click this double T icon or button, and I'll click on that, and that'll make it all caps, okay? So now, in order to make this look like the text is standing up in the area, I'm going to select layer 1 in the timeline, and I'll press R to open the rotation values of my text. Sound good? All right. So now I'm going to scrub on the X parameter for rotation, and notice now my text looks like it's standing up in the scene. Just so it's at an exact right angle, I'm going to click on the second setting here for X rotation, and I'll set it to a setting of 90 and press enter on my keyboard. Now you may have noticed my anchor point is on the left side of the text. That's because the paragraph panel has my text left justified. I'm going to go ahead and click the center text option, and that will center my text in the scene. Now I want to draw your attention to the scale setting. So I'll click once on layer 1, and I'll press S to open the scale. And notice the scale of my text is set to 3000. Yours may be a different number, okay? Don't panic. This is just how the text is placed in the scene based on how the camera was created and the amount of pixels that were determined within the individual scene. So to decrease the size of the text, I'm going to hover over the X parameter, and I'll hold down Shift, and I'll click and drag. When you hold Shift as you click and drag, it will move 10 times faster than just clicking and dragging alone. So I want my text to be a little bit smaller in the scene. And rather than using the word text, I'll double click on the T here in the timeline to select the text. And let's say we're going to go ahead and create like a time tag where it says next is coming up, whatever. So I'm going to venture far away from the word text and change it to next. All right. So here we go. I'll type NEXT. Perfect. And when I'm done, I'll grab my selection tool. Okay. So in order to make this a little bit more legible, with layer 1 selected, I'll go back to my character panel, and I'll change the text from Arial narrow to Arial bold. And that'll help that text pop off the background a little bit. You could choose a custom color by clicking in the fill color options, but I'll leave it set to white for right now because I want to add a little more depth into the scene. To do that, I'll select layer 3, my original video layer, and I'll press E on the keyboard to open the effects for that layer. When you click on the effect itself, the camera tracker, that will bring your points back. So you can hover your mouse over the area underneath the text. So I'll click once to get my 3 points selected again, okay? And this time I'll right click in the center of the target, and I'm going to do something called set the ground plane and origin. What this does is it reorients the world of this 3D environment to be around a 0, 0, 0 point for X, Y, and Z, which is called the origin. And so we're going to set the origin right in the middle of my text, okay? So I'll set ground plane and origin. It says objects already exist. That's fine. I'll just go ahead and continue, and that's perfectly fine. Usually when you set the ground plane and origin, you want to set that first before you add text into the scene, but since I reset it, it's perfectly fine, okay? Now I want to add a light and a shadow underneath my text, all right? So I'm going to hover back over the center of the target, and I'll right click and I'll add what's called a shadow catcher, camera, and light. When I do that, I've now got my text, which has disappeared. So you know what? I'm going to Control Z and undo the last two things I did. I apologize. When I reset the ground plane and origin, I mixed up the lights, and I'm sorry. I'm just ripping through this and I skipped a step. So I apologize, I'm human. We're gonna move on, all right? So I undid those last settings. I'll reselect my text and make sure that it's set to bold, okay? So I'll click on my camera tracker again. I'll come back up here. I'll right click and say create shadow catcher, camera, and light. And you know what? It's gonna do it again. So I apologize. I'm gonna click. Sometimes this happens, all right? So it's fine. What we can do is actually just delete all of the other information that I added into the scene. So I'll click on my camera tracker, shift click, reselect all the layers, and I'll just delete, okay? I apologize. I'm gonna click on the 3D camera tracker. I'll come back up to my main area here. I'll right click and I'll set my ground plane and origin, okay? Is everybody with me? Okay. All right. Now I'll come right back up again. I'll click on those 3 points. I'll right click. I'll create a text and camera. Okay? I'll select my text layer. I'll press R to open the rotation, and I'll change the X rotation to a value of 90 and press enter. I'll select my text, press S, hold shift and click and drag to scale my text down, okay? So now I think we're all back up to where we were before I missed a step, okay? So I'll click back on my camera tracker. I'll come back up here, click on those 3 points. I'll right click and create a shadow catcher and light. And now that I've done that, this is exactly what I was hoping for, okay? I've got my light, I've got my shadow catcher, and I've got my text. Notice the second I selected the light, the scene refreshed so I could see exactly what things look like, all right? So what I'm gonna do is select the shadow catcher layer, which is set up this way, and when I press S, that'll open up the scale of that layer, okay? And I wanna scale it out so the edge of my shadow doesn't get cut off, okay? So over the scale, I'll click and drag, and I'll hold shift as I drag, and that will scale that element out, okay? Now, to reorient the shadow so it's not so drastic, I'll move the position of the light in 3D space. Sound good? All right, so I'll click on the light, I'll press P, and then I'll hover over the X parameter, and if I click and drag, it's gonna move that shadow a little bit. You guessed it, I'm going to shift, click and drag, and that will move the light around the text accordingly. So you can move your light however you like, so you can adjust your shadow to your own personal taste. I'm just gonna move it so it's not so far off to the left. I will shift, click and drag on the Y parameter to move the light up a little bit in the scene, and I'll shift, click and drag to the left to bring the text back over to the left, like so. Is everybody good? How's everyone doing with the lights and shadows? We're all right? All right. So now I want to change the darkness of this shadow because it's extraordinarily dark, right? In order to adjust that, shadows are controlled by light settings. So I'll click on the light and I'll press AA on my keyboard rather rapidly to open the light options. Under the light options at the bottom, I can adjust the shadow darkness. So I'm going to click on that, and I'll change the darkness down to a setting of about 75% and press enter. And you know what? I'm gonna make it even lighter. Let's set it to something around 50%, okay? You can also change the shadow diffusion, which is how soft the shadow is on its edges. So I'll increase the shadow diffusion to get the edges of the shadow, and notice it's sharp down here and it gets more blurry as it moves away from the text, okay? Now to make the text pop a little bit more, I'm going to select my text and I'll change the text color just by going over to the character panel, and I'll click on the color, and I'll just create kind of this purpley color to my text. And I'll click OK. You can choose whatever color you like. All right? So now, if I press the space bar, you can see I've got the text in the scene, and it actually looks like it's tracked within the environment. Does anybody think that's cool? Yeah, all right. Notice it's bouncing with the camera, just like it was placed into the scene. Now let's work on animating this and having a graphic animate to make it look like the text is getting sucked into the graphic. Does that sound like a good thing? I know it's the middle of the afternoon. All right, there we go. Okay, cool. I got some yeses. All right. I'll press the space bar to stop playback. I'll move my current time indicator back to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to collapse layer 1, and I'll click on my 3D camera effect so that I can actually come back up and click the 3 points underneath my text. There we go. Okay? What I want to do is add a solid underneath my text. Okay? So I'll right click now that I have those 3 points selected, and I'll create a solid. And the solid is automatically going to be placed on the ground plane. Is everybody with me? All right. So I'll select the solid, and I'll press S, and I'll just increase the size of the solid by increasing the scale. Okay? Now, in order to swap this out with a graphic element, I need to do a function called pre-compose. So what I'll do is I'll select the layer solid, I'll go up under layer, and I'll go down and choose pre-compose. Okay? Under my pre-compose options, what I want to do is leave all the attributes of this layer, and I'll rename the composition graphic pre for pre-comp. Okay? Then I'll click OK. And nothing much has changed other than now this solid has turned into a pre-composition. What this gives me the ability to do is create an animated graphic element in the pre-composition. Does that sound cool? All right. So what I'll do is I'll double click on layer 1, which opens the pre-composition, which is totally flat. Okay, so now we're just going to work in 2D space. Sound good? All right. So I'll come up to my shape tools here, which is in the upper left corner of the interface, and I'll click and hold on my shape tools, and I'll choose the ellipse tool. Okay? I'm making sure nothing is selected in the timeline. I'll click in this dark gray area down here, and I'll double click on my shape, and that's automatically going to place a circle in the middle of my composition. Okay? So what I want to do is not have a fill. So if you hold down Alt, or if you hold down Alt and click on the fill, not once, not twice, but 3 times, that will eliminate that fill. Okay? I can come here to the stroke options, and I could increase the width of the stroke. Okay? So now I'm going to go down to my shape options here for my shape layer. And I'll collapse my gradient fill setting here, and I'll open my transform options for this ellipse, and I will decrease the scale of the ellipse. Okay? So I want the ellipse to get to about this point, and then I want the width of the stroke to scale down and disappear. So here, if I go to my stroke width, I'll have it disappear. Okay? So here, I'll set my stroke width to an even value of 120. And I'll press enter. I'll scroll till I get to my transform options for this circle, and I'll change the scale down to a setting of 0 and press enter. Okay? My current time indicator is at frame 0. I'll click the stopwatch to set the scale parameter to 0, and then I'll go ahead and move to 1 second in the timeline, and I'll set the scale up to a value of 80, which is where it was before. Is everybody with me? All right. So now what I'll do is I'll move my current time indicator back to about frame 20, And right here is where I want the width of the line to start to scale down, okay? So I'll scroll back up to my stroke width, and I'll add a keyframe right here for my stroke width at 120, okay? Now, if I scroll down, I can use these navigation arrows to move to the next keyframe, and I'll scroll back up here and change the stroke width to a setting of 0 and press Enter. To more clearly see these keyframes, I'll scroll up, select the shape layer, and I'll press the U key. The U key will show you any animated parameters for that layer, okay? Now, I'll go ahead and move my shape layer element down below my track solid. Actually, Control Z, I'll undo that. What I want to do is have this track solid fill the shape layer, okay? So I'll select layer 2, and I'll go up here under my source name right here, and I'll right click and go to columns and choose the modes column, okay? In order to see the modes here, I'll select this layer, track solid, and I'll tell it to look at the alpha of the layer above to determine transparency. Okay? So when I do that, if I scrub, you'll notice now the circle is green. Okay? And it's looking at the circle below to determine its fill color. Is everybody with me? Yeah? Okay. I'll go ahead and collapse layer 1, and I'll go back to my concrete composition. Now, if I press the space bar, you'll see my circle pop out in the scene because that layer starts right at frame 1. Okay? So what I'm going to do, or frame 0 to be exact, what I'm going to do is move down the timeline to about 3 seconds in the animation. So move your current time indicator to 3 seconds and select your text layer. And right here, I want you to add a keyframe for scale. And then we'll move down the timeline about 20 frames, and we'll just change the scale to a setting of 0. So now if I go ahead and go back to the beginning and press the space bar, you'll see the circle come out and the text scale down. So I'll press the space bar to stop playback. What I want to see happen is the circle come out and the text kind of scale down with the circle, right? So I'm going to eyeball this. I'll move my current time indicator to around 306, just roughly between these two keyframes. I'll select layer 1 and I'll press the left bracket key, which is right next to the P key, okay? That'll automatically slide that layer down the timeline. So now if I scrub with my current time indicator, the text will come down, and as it's coming down, my circle will come out and make the text look like it's disappearing into the scene. Now you may have noticed the circle is not blending with the background layers at all. It's 100% opaque. So what I need to do is change the blend mode. So I'll toggle my switches and modes. If you come down to the bottom of the timeline, you can click the toggle switches and modes button, or I could use that same command by right-clicking next to the source name and go to columns and choose modes. However you want to get your modes active, you can do that, all right? So I'll come back up here and I'll change my mode to multiply, and that will make the green color multiply and blend with the layers below. So now if I scrub, you can see my text scales down and my graphic comes out and disappears out of the scene. So all we have to do is press the space bar and the scene will loop back. There we have our text and it scales down and we have our graphic appear out of the scene. If we wanted our text to scale up into the scene, we could animate a scale parameter for the text popping up into the scene. Those of you that are more advanced After Effects users, by all means, you can select the keyframes and adjust the ease on the keyframes to change the interpolation between the keyframes. But overall, this has been a pretty straightforward introduction into tracking with a 3D camera tracker and compositing graphics into the scene. So I just want to say thank you very much for following along with me. And if you want to check this out live online, or not live online, repeat online, you can check it out, fmc.com, right? Future Media Concepts YouTube channel. All right, so once again, this is Ian Robinson. I really enjoyed presenting with Dell and FMC. Have a good one.